Nestled deep in the heart of the vast, untamed forest, Silverbrook Valley was a secluded mountain village where the wind whispered through the trees and the clear river rushed over smooth stones. This village, remote and tucked away from the world, had existed for generations. The villagers lived simple, hard-working lives, relying heavily on the surrounding wilderness for their survival. Agriculture and livestock were their primary means of sustenance, and every person in the village had a specific role. Their lives were governed by the seasons, the land, and the animals that shared their space. The mountains that embraced the village were ancient, their peaks jagged and towering, a reminder of nature's immovable force. But for the people of Silverbrook, these mountains were home, a sanctuary where nature provided, but also demanded respect. The villagers knew the rhythms of the land and had learned to live in harmony with it. Yet this delicate balance was not always easy. There were times when the wild seemed to push back against their presence, testing their resolve. It was during one of these times, in the midst of a season where survival felt especially uncertain, that an unlikely bond began to form. A bond that would change both the human and animal worlds forever. Deep within the towering trees and shadowed groves of the forest, a massive grizzly bear roamed. His fur, a dark, weathered brown, was a testament to the many years he had spent in solitude. He was no stranger to battle, nor to the harshness of nature. With powerful limbs and claws capable of tearing through the toughest bark, the bear had long been a figure of strength and dominance in his territory. For many years, the bear had lived alone. The wilds were his home, his domain, one he fiercely defended from any threat, whether it was the competition of other predators or the encroachment of humans. His massive frame, built for survival, was a mixture of raw power and enduring wisdom. He was a creature driven by instinct, always hunting, always moving, always wary of those who might threaten his peaceful existence. Yet beneath the layers of muscle and thick fur, there was a calmness about him, a deep, primal understanding of the forest. Unlike other creatures of his kind, he did not always seek the thrill of the hunt. He had learned to coexist with the forest, respecting the animals around him without needlessly disturbing the balance. Though he was a solitary creature by nature, there was a quiet wisdom in the way he moved through the forest. His presence was a constant, like the seasons that passed each year. The forest was his world, and he had long ago accepted the solitude that came with it. Yet despite the bear's fierce reputation and dominance over the forest, there was something different about him. He was not as aggressive as the others of his kind, nor as territorial. Perhaps it was the years of survival that had taught him the value of restraint, or perhaps it was something deeper, something inherent in the way he connected with the wilderness itself. Whatever the reason, he was not like the other bears of the forest. There was an understanding of life beyond mere survival, a recognition that there was more to this world than just instinct. A few miles outside Silverbrook Valley, on a small farm near the edge of the forest, lived a horse named Storm. Unlike the other horses on the farm, Storm was different. He was a striking creature, his coat a glossy black, with a white streak running down his forehead like a mark of destiny. His deep brown eyes were both intelligent and full of curiosity, and his spirit was not one to be tamed easily. Storm had always been a horse of unusual temperament. While the other horses were content with their duties, pulling plows and carrying riders, Storm often found himself yearning for something more. His spirit was wild, untamed, and he longed to roam beyond the confines of the farm's fences. Every chance he got, he would break free from his stall, galloping across the wide fields and into the dense forest beyond. It wasn't that he didn't love the farm or the family who cared for him. It was that he couldn't help but feel the call of the wild, the call to roam free. Though his owners tolerated his frequent escapes, they could not understand his need for freedom. They tried in vain to keep him close, to make him a working animal like the others. But Storm was not a horse content to serve simply as a beast of burden. He had a deep connection to the land, a longing to be part of something larger than the farm, something untamed and vast. Storm spent much of his time in the meadows, the forests, and the fields surrounding the village, often running wild and free. The forest, with its towering trees and whispering winds, called to him like nothing else. He had a connection to it, a sense that he was meant for something greater than the life of a farm animal. He was strong and fast, able to run with the wind, to feel the earth beneath him in a way that no human or other creature could understand. But as much as Storm yearned for freedom, he was still bound to the farm, still tied to the people who cared for him. He knew that his purpose, at least in their eyes, was to work for the farm, to serve the humans who depended on him. Yet deep within him, there was a yearning for more, a yearning that the open forest could not satisfy alone. One crisp autumn afternoon, Storm, having escaped his confines once again, found himself deep within the forest. The trees, now heavy with gold and crimson leaves, whispered in the wind, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth. He had wandered farther than he had before, drawn to the deeper parts of the woods by a pull he could not explain. It was here that he first saw him, the bear. At first, Storm froze. His heart raced and instinct told him to turn and run, for this was no ordinary creature. The bear was massive, its fur dark and matted with the forest's earth. His huge form loomed against the trees, his eyes glowing with the quiet wisdom of the forest. Yet Storm did not run. Instead, he stood there, watching the bear, his body tense, but strangely calm. There was no fear in his heart. The bear was not threatening, not charging, and though it was a predator in the truest sense of the word, Storm felt no immediate danger. The two animals stood in silence, each watching the other. The bear, too, seemed to regard Storm with curiosity, its deep eyes scanning the horse as if trying to understand the strange creature in its presence. The quiet connection between them was almost palpable, a bond forming not through words, but through an unspoken understanding. In that moment, something shifted. What had begun as an encounter filled with tension became the beginning of an unlikely friendship, one that neither creature could fully explain, but would come to shape both their destinies. The first encounter between Storm and the bear had been a moment of quiet observation. For a long time, they simply stood there, eyeing each other from a distance. The bear, with its massive size and fierce reputation, had the appearance of an apex predator, while Storm, a horse known for his gentleness, seemed out of place in the presence of such raw power. But neither creature acted on instinct alone. There was something about the moment, something unspoken, that kept them rooted to the spot. Storm had heard the stories, the warnings from other horses about the dangers lurking in the forest. Bears were a threat to anyone who wandered too far from safety. Yet this bear didn't seem like the others Storm had heard about. His eyes, though sharp and watchful, carried an unusual calmness. There was no immediate aggression, no tension in the air, just an eerie silence that hung between the two creatures, a moment frozen in time. For Storm, it was an unfamiliar feeling. He was used to running, to fleeing from danger. Yet for some reason, he didn't feel the immediate urge to retreat. He wasn't afraid. The bear, too, had not made any move to attack, as he might have in the past. There was something about the way the horse stood, still calm and composed, that seemed to intrigue the bear. The horse wasn't acting like prey. After what felt like an eternity of quiet watching, the bear took a slow step forward, his large paws pressing into the soft earth. Storm's muscles tensed, but he didn't move. Instead, he watched as the bear circled around him, each step deliberate, his eyes never leaving the horse. There was no growl, no baring of teeth, just a silent assessment, as if the bear was trying to understand the strange creature before him. Storm's heartbeat quickened, but he stood his ground. What was this strange force that made him stay, even in the presence of such a mighty animal? For a moment, it seemed that the world had shrunk to just the two of them, standing in the middle of the vast forest, each waiting for the other to make the first move. The bear, sensing no immediate threat from Storm, paused a few feet away. He sat down on his haunches, his great form lowering to the ground in a slow, deliberate motion. He watched the horse with a quiet intensity, as if waiting for some signal that he could trust this creature. There was something about the way the horse held himself, something different from the usual animals he encountered. Storm, still unsure of the next step, let his body relax slightly. He took a careful, slow step closer to the bear, not in fear, but in curiosity. The bear watched him, his eyes flicking to Storm's every movement. There was no growl, no warning, just a silent moment where the two creatures shared space. The moment that followed was nothing short of miraculous. As Storm stepped forward, the bear made no move to stop him. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, his eyes softening, as though accepting the horse's presence. The forest itself seemed to quiet, as if holding its breath. The birds stopped chirping, the wind stilled for just a moment. In that space, there was only the bear and the horse, existing in a strange, quiet understanding. The horse's chest rose and fell with each breath, his muscles still, his senses on high alert. But deep inside, there was no fear. There was no panic. It was a feeling he had never had before. This calmness, this trust in something other than instinct. He was no longer the creature running from danger. He was standing side by side with it. The bear's massive form loomed over him, but instead of an overwhelming presence, Storm felt a strange sense of safety, a silent agreement that they were not enemies. The horse, who had often felt the tug of loneliness in his heart, found himself oddly comforted by the bear's calm demeanor. He had come into the forest seeking freedom, seeking something more than the life he had known on the farm, and now, in the most unexpected way, he had found it. After a few moments of standing side by side, the bear did something that only deepened the bond between them. He lowered his large head, extending his snout toward Storm's side. The bear, who had once been an apex predator, now seemed to be seeking something entirely different: connection. Storm stood still, his ears flicking as the bear's warm breath brushed against his side. There was no hostility, no aggression. The bear's gesture was almost gentle. It was as though he was testing the waters, trying to understand if this bond, this strange new relationship, was something worth exploring. After a brief moment, Storm's own instinct to retreat softened. Instead of pulling away, he nuzzled the bear's head with his nose, a gentle and unexpected act of trust. The horse had never shown such closeness to any other creature, not even the humans who had raised him. But with the bear, something told him this was different. And just like that, their bond was formed, not through dominance or aggression, but through something deeper, something that spoke to the heart of both creatures. They were no longer predator and prey, but something else, something more powerful. The next day, the bond between the horse and the bear grew even stronger. The bear, once a solitary figure in the vast forest, began to appear more frequently near Storm's favorite grazing spots. Storm, who had been accustomed to roaming the open fields alone, now found himself accompanied by the bear. They moved together, silent companions, through the dense trees, sharing the stillness of the forest. The bear showed Storm the secrets of the wild, paths that led to hidden springs and quiet meadows. For the first time, Storm understood the forest not just through his human's teachings, but through the bear's quiet wisdom. The bear, in turn, seemed to appreciate the company, finding peace in the presence of the horse. The wild was no longer something to be feared. It was something to be understood. As the days grew warmer and the sun began to rise earlier, the bond between the bear and Storm became undeniable. What had begun as an unexpected encounter in the forest had blossomed into a quiet companionship that neither creature had anticipated. It was a relationship built on a foundation of trust, the trust of two creatures from different worlds, each seeking something the other could offer. Each day, Storm ventured further into the forest with the bear by his side. The grizzly, once a solitary figure, had begun to share his knowledge of the forest with the horse. Storm, though a farm animal by nature, had come to see the forest through the bear's eyes. There were paths that led to hidden groves, streams that ran with the clearest water, and caves where the scent of the earth lingered like ancient memories. The bear, with its keen instincts, guided Storm through the forest, showing him the parts of the wilderness that were both wild and beautiful. For Storm, the forest had always been a place of freedom, a place where he could run wild. But now it was more than that. It was a place of understanding. With each step alongside the bear, Storm felt more attuned to the land around him. He no longer just roamed through the forest. He began to feel a deep connection to it. As the two spent more time together, the bond between them grew. The bear, though fiercely independent, seemed to relax in the horse's presence. And the horse, once anxious in the face of such a powerful creature, learned to feel safe. There was no rush to leave, no urge to fight. There was only quiet companionship, two animals walking side by side through the wild. Storm would often find the bear sitting by the river's edge, watching the water flow as though contemplating the very fabric of life itself. The horse would join him, grazing lazily by the water, listening to the rhythm of the forest, and simply being present. There was no need for words between them. Their companionship was formed not in conversation, but in shared stillness. One morning, as the mist still clung to the trees, and the sun had not yet fully risen, the pair encountered something unexpected. A hunter's trap hidden beneath the underbrush, its iron jaws poised to catch any creature that wandered too close. Storm, who had wandered off ahead of the bear, stepped into the trap without realizing it. The snap of the iron jaws echoed through the still forest as they clamped around his leg. The horse whinnied in pain and tried to pull away, but the trap held fast, its teeth cutting into his flesh. The bear, hearing the commotion, rushed forward. His large form appeared suddenly, emerging from the trees like a shadow of strength. He paused for a moment, his eyes scanning the scene, and then, with a deep growl, he began to work. With one powerful swipe of his paw, the bear dismantled the trap, ripping it apart with his immense strength. His massive claws worked with precision, tearing through the metal like it was paper. Storm, still trembling from the pain of the trap, watched in awe as the bear freed him, his heart racing from the close call. The bear, after a moment, nudged the horse gently with his nose as if to reassure him. There was no sense of triumph or pride in the bear's actions. It was just something he had done, an instinct to protect, not just for himself, but for something that now mattered deeply to him. Storm, grateful and humbled by the bear's strength, nuzzled the grizzly's side. It was the first time the horse had truly understood what it meant to be part of the wild, to not just survive but protect and defend those who needed it most. From that day forward, the bond between them was no longer just one of mutual curiosity. It was a bond built on loyalty and sacrifice. As time passed, Storm's connection with the bear deepened. He learned more of the forest's rhythm, and the bear became not just a guide, but a protector. There was no doubt in Storm's mind now. This grizzly, who had once seemed so fearsome, was now his greatest ally in the wilderness. They shared a world together, a world where the rules of survival were no longer dictated by aggression or fear, but by an understanding of each other's strengths and weaknesses. Storm, in return, began to protect the bear in small ways. When they would rest near the edges of the forest, Storm would keep watch, his ears twitching at every sound. If the bear needed a moment of rest after a long day of navigating the wilds, Storm would stand watch, his eyes ever vigilant. Their roles were simple yet profound. They were a team, and together they became something greater than the sum of their parts. The bond that formed between them was a reminder of the quiet resilience of the natural world. It was a bond built not from words, but from the shared silence of the forest, from the unspoken trust that had bloomed between a horse and a bear. Two creatures who had learned to depend on each other in ways that defied the boundaries of their instincts. As the seasons passed, Storm and the bear continued their quiet existence in the forest. They roamed together, sharing their moments of peace and quiet. The horse no longer felt the urge to escape to the farm, for he had found his place in the wild. The bear, once a solitary creature, now had a companion who understood the forest as deeply as he did. The village, once a distant part of Storm's life, was no longer where he belonged. The forest had become his home, a home that was shared with the bear, a place where he could run freely, yet always with the knowledge that he had a protector by his side. Though the path ahead was uncertain and the forest could be unpredictable, the bond between the two was steadfast. They would face the challenges of the wild together, knowing that no matter what came their way, they would not face it alone. Their unlikely friendship had become something stronger than either creature had ever imagined, a connection that transcended the laws of nature, a testament to the power of trust and the unexpected, quiet strength found in the most unlikely of places. The bond between the bear and Storm had only grown deeper with time. The days of quiet companionship in the forest had become their shared rhythm, and the wild seemed to welcome them both. The horse, once bound to the farm, had found his true place in the forest, where the breeze through the trees and the sound of the river running could fill his soul. The bear, now a protector, had found solace in the company of Storm, a companion who understood the language of the wilderness, who knew the silent code of the forest. Yet in the stillness of their world, something was beginning to stir, a disturbance that neither of them could ignore. The village that had once been a distant memory for Storm began to feel closer as the seasons shifted. For the first time, the farm's owners had started to take more interest in the land that surrounded them. The humans, who had long lived in harmony with the animals of the forest, were now beginning to see the forest as something to be conquered. With the increasing pressure to expand their farmlands, the village had begun to creep closer to the edges of the forest. They cut down trees, clearing spaces to plant crops and build more homes. The harmony that had once existed between the village and the wilderness was beginning to fray. The sounds of saws and axes echoed through the trees, and the once peaceful forest began to change. The bear, who had long understood the rhythms of the forest, began to feel the disturbance of the humans encroaching. His territory, his home, was being threatened, and with it, his bond with Storm was now caught in the crossfire of the human world and the wild world they both inhabited. Storm, too, could feel the change. His visits to the village had become rarer, but now he noticed the humans coming further into the forest. He could see the workers clearing trees and pushing their boundaries into the very land the bear had protected for so long. The horse, ever the free spirit, could sense the shift. He wasn't used to seeing the wilds disturbed in this way, and the bond he had built with the bear made him worry for his companion. The bear, as much as he had respected the land and its balance, now found himself in a position he had not anticipated. He had to protect his territory from the humans. But in doing so, he risked losing the one thing that had brought him peace, his connection to the horse. The horse, too, was torn. He loved the wild, but the humans were his creators. They had raised him on the farm, fed him, and given him a life of comfort. But now, seeing the damage they were causing, the growing threat they posed to the forest, he began to question his place. He had always felt a deep desire to run free, but the life he knew was in conflict with the forest he had come to love. One night, as they grazed together by the riverbank, the tension between them finally surfaced. Storm turned to the bear, his eyes full of confusion and worry. "We can't just let them do this," Storm said, his voice filled with urgency. The bear looked at him, his deep golden eyes reflecting the same sense of unease. For the first time, the forest didn't feel like home. The trees no longer whispered peace. They spoke of intrusion, of disturbance. But even as the bear's instincts to protect kicked in, something deeper held him back. He had already given so much to this land, had already risked everything to save Storm and the village from the flood. Could he really fight against the humans, those who had unknowingly placed him in this dilemma? Could the bond he had formed with the horse survive a world that seemed so determined to break them apart? The next morning, as the bear and Storm wandered deeper into the forest, they came upon the edge of the clearing where the humans had begun their work. The sight of felled trees and the sound of axes biting into the trunks of the ancient oaks sent a ripple of unease through both creatures. The air was thick with tension. The forest, which had been their sanctuary, was no longer a safe haven. Storm could hear the voices of the workers from a distance. Their chatter, filled with the sound of axes and saws, grew louder with every passing second. The bear moved closer to the clearing, his muscles tensing, preparing to do what he had done before, to defend his home. Storm watched the bear, his heart heavy. Could he allow this? Could he stand by while his friend fought the very people who had once been kind to him? And yet the bear's actions were no longer just about instincts. He had a deeper connection to the land than any human could ever understand. He had chosen to protect the forest, to defend the bond that had formed between him and Storm. But this would not be an easy fight. Without warning, the bear charged into the clearing, his massive frame cutting through the air like a storm. His roar was deafening as he bared his teeth at the humans who had dared to intrude upon his territory. Storm, startled but resolute, galloped forward, his hooves thundering against the earth. He knew what he had to do. This wasn't just the bear's fight, it was his too. Together, the two creatures faced the human threat. The bear's claws slashed the air, his roar sending the workers scattering. Storm, using his speed and agility, kicked up dust, creating a barrier between the humans and the bear, ensuring they couldn't get too close. The workers, terrified, dropped their tools and fled, leaving the clearing in chaos. But the damage was done. The bond between the bear and the humans had been broken. The forest would never be the same again. As the last of the workers retreated, the bear turned back to Storm, his heavy breath echoing in the stillness. The forest, though unsettled by the recent conflict, seemed to breathe again, as if reclaiming its peace. The horse stood beside the bear, his heart heavy with the choices that lay before them both. The bear had protected his home, but it had come at a cost. "We cannot go back," Storm said, his voice quiet but filled with resolve. The bear nodded, his gaze lingering on the clearing where the humans had once been. They both knew the truth now. The wild could not be reclaimed, not while the humans encroached upon it, and neither could their bond remain in the shadows. The bond they had forged was stronger than the territory they shared. The forest had always been a place of peace for both the bear and Storm. It had given them solace, freedom, and the quiet understanding that only the wild could offer. But now, as the echoes of the humans' retreat faded into the distance, there was an undeniable change in the air. The bond between the bear and Storm had grown from something unexpected into a deep and unshakable connection. And yet, even with that bond, they both knew that things could never return to what they once were. The days that followed the confrontation with the humans were heavy with silence. The forest was no longer as it had once been. The trees, some of them scarred from the intrusion, stood as reminders of the cost of defending their territory. The bear, though his strength was unmatched, was not without wear. His body, weathered by years of survival, carried the weight of his choices. Each day his movements seemed a little slower, a little more deliberate, and the once dominant bear had to acknowledge the reality that his time in this land was drawing to a close. Storm, too, felt the change. The forest was no longer a place of refuge for him. He had seen the tension that had built between the humans and the creatures of the wild. The humans had begun to see the wild as a resource to be tamed, something that could be shaped to fit their needs. Storm could no longer ignore the pull between the two worlds, the one where he had been raised and the one that had embraced him as a creature of the wild. He stood beside the bear one evening, looking out across the forest where the light of the setting sun filtered through the trees. He could feel the weight of the decisions ahead. The human world and the wild world were no longer separate in his mind. He knew the bear had done what he had to, protecting their home at all costs, but the future was uncertain. Would the humans return? Would the forest ever truly be safe again? One crisp autumn evening, as the leaves danced in the wind and the first signs of winter crept through the forest, Storm stood at the edge of the clearing where the humans had once tried to cut down the trees. The bear stood beside him, his massive frame still and watchful. The two creatures, once so different, now shared a quiet understanding. The forest, though scarred, was theirs. But Storm knew he couldn't stay forever. His heart, despite its deep connection to the bear and the wild, pulled him towards something else. The humans, though they had caused harm, were still part of the world he had known. And though his connection to the wild was strong, the time had come for him to choose. He turned to the bear, his eyes full of both gratitude and sorrow. "I can't stay," Storm said, his voice soft yet firm. "The world has changed, and so must I. I've learned so much from you, from the forest, but my path is calling me back." The bear, who had never been one for words, simply nodded. His deep, golden eyes reflected the understanding that had existed between them from the very first moment they had met. There was no anger, no bitterness, only acceptance. The bond they had shared was not one that could be broken by distance, by time, or by choices. It was a bond formed in the heart of the wild, a bond that would never be forgotten. Storm took a final look at the forest, at the bear who had been his companion, his protector, and his friend. This wild world would always be a part of him, no matter where he went. "Thank you, my friend," Storm whispered, his voice carrying a softness that only the bear could understand. With that, the horse turned and made his way toward the distant village, the path back to the world he had once known. But as he walked, he knew that the forest and the bear who had saved him would always be in his heart. Weeks passed, and Storm settled back into the life he had left behind. But the memories of the bear and their time in the forest never faded. The villagers, having witnessed the strange and remarkable friendship between the two creatures, never forgot the lessons they had learned. They no longer viewed the wild as something to conquer. Instead, they came to see it as a place of balance, a place to be respected. In honor of the bear's sacrifice and the bond he had shared with Storm, the villagers decided to create a monument at the edge of the forest, a small stone engraved with the images of the bear and the horse standing side by side. It was a tribute to the unlikely friendship that had saved their village and changed their understanding of the world. The inscription read, "In memory of the grizzly and the horse, whose bond taught us the true meaning of courage, sacrifice, and the power of understanding." The monument stood as a reminder to all who passed by that the wild was not something to be feared, but something to be respected, and that true strength lies not just in power, but in the ability to trust and protect one another. Years passed, and the village thrived. The human world continued to grow, but the wild remained still and timeless. The bond between the bear and the horse became a story passed down through the generations, a legend of an unlikely friendship that transcended the boundaries of instinct, species, and worlds. The children of the village, now grown, would visit the monument, touching the stone in reverence, and hear the stories of the bear and the horse, their courage, their loyalty, and their enduring friendship. Though the bear was no longer there to roam the forests, and Storm had long since returned to his place among the humans, their legacy lived on. The wild had become a part of them both, and their story was forever etched into the heart of Silverbrook Valley. As the sun set over the village one final time, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the quiet remembrance of a bear and a horse, two unlikely companions who had shown the world that even the wildest creatures can forge the deepest of bonds.